Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Be Neighbors. We are in the thick of talking about the Great Salt Lake, and we have an incredible lineup of people. And we have someone very special today. We have Candice Hasenyager, who is the director of the Utah Division of Water Resources, here to talk to us about the past, present, and hopeful future that is being undertaken for Great Salt Lake, and specifically with the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. And we'll let her talk about all that. We have a lot of questions from you, and so we will just get straight into the presentation and answering your questions. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Candice.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. Right off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of Great Salt Lake. Many of us over the last several years, or maybe decades, have long loved Great Salt Lake, but it has been in the news a lot more lately as lake levels have declined, which we'll talk about. That being said, it is a really significant Western Hemisphere flyover for about 10 million migratory birds. We have industry on the lake, brine shrimp, and it has some of the most extensive area of wetlands within Utah. So it's a really important place for ecology, environment, and our economy. And really, as I said, not just in Utah, but across the West, in the Western Hemisphere. Great Salt Lake has seen record highs in the 80s and then kind of deteriorated since then as our elevation has dropped. So this is kind of a cool visual of the lake. Not all of us are fortunate enough to go out in helicopters and explore it, but this kind of gives you a look over the lake of, in the highs, what did it look like when it was about 4212 about to what it kind of looks like at its historical average. I will say, and we can talk about it in a minute, that we don't stay at average for long. It's a place we have passed either going up or going down, but our historical average, you can kind of see what that looks like. In 2022, we hit the record low since we have been recording the data, so at 4188.5, and that's where we got a lot of concern and attention raised with Great Salt Lake. And then last year, because of the banner year we did see some recovery at 4194, which was a great thing, but we know we need to continue to do more to get water to Great Salt Lake. I would note that just for those viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with it, you can really see it well in the 2000 picture that there are kind of different arms of Great Salt Lake. If you see the difference in color, kind of the grayish, one on the top of the image to below that, you can kind of see that line across it. That is the Union Pacific Causeway that crosses the lake, and that comes into play a little bit later when we talk about some of the management operations that are occurring. You can see Bear River Bay on the top right, Gilbert Bay or the South Arm on the bottom left, and then on the right is Farmington Bay, closest to the city. So just to kind of orientate people on Great Salt Lake when we talk about the different areas. As I mentioned, we've seen a downward trend. So this shows back historic records on the figure. So this is the north arm is the red line. The blue line is the south arm. You can see that from 1965 to 2024, this kind of time series of data on the elevations, which you can see on the y-axis. So you can see we hit those highs on both the north and the south arm in the 80s, and then we've had pretty much deterioration or reduction in our elevations over those years. And then if you look at 2023, that blue line in the south arm shot up significantly, about 5.5 feet, and then the north arm didn't come up quite as much. Generally, the average inflows into Great Salt Lake are contributed by the Bear River, the Weber River, and the Jordan River, and they roughly equate to about 2 million acre feet, depending on the year. We know that in 2021 and 2022, we saw some of the record low levels entering the lake of about 1 million acre feet. I should say Great Salt Lake also evaporates a lot of water because of it's a big body of water, but we can talk more about that in a little bit. So this is kind of an interesting chart, but it's also a little confusing, so I'll explain it. This shows the water year on the x-axis, and this is the surface water elevation of the South Arm. So if you look at the red kind of in the background, that was the elevation of the South Arm in 2021. And then if you step forward in 2022, it shows the elevation in 2022. The green was 2023, and this blue kind of shows where we're at in 2024. So we're just above 4193.2, I think, as I saw the most recent, but right around that area. So we're just above where we were starting in 2021. So we know we still have a long way to go. One of the things I think is really important to note is not only is Great Salt Lake kind of complex in all of its systems, but it's also a very complex basin. It's a very large, 36,000 square miles. There's 4 states involved, 18 counties, 141 cities, 70 groundwater aquifers, roughly 1,300 reservoirs, 150,000 water rights. There's 2.8 million humans living in this basin, 1.5 million acres of farmland, just under 700,000 acres of urban area, 184,000 acres of wetlands, and there's behaviors and attitudes and values that shape this really complex system and the way we use water and the way it flows and gets to Great Salt Lake. And I should mention kind of the legal framework of which to get that to get water to Great Salt Lake. So there's a lot that we know about Great Salt Lake. And we kind of equate it to a puzzle, right? When you first are getting out your puzzle, I don't know about you guys, I love puzzles. You kind of lay out all the pieces, you line up all the edges, and then you start filling it in. And so when we do that on Great Salt Lake, we realize that there's a lot of things that we do know, but there are some pieces of information that make the picture incomplete. And so one of the purposes of the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan is really to show what are the missing pieces, and then how can we complete that picture. So, and that's really what we're trying to do. Just a little background. So in 2022, HB 429 was passed, which was called the Great Salt Lake Watershed Integrated Water Assessment. And that's another mouthful. The state appropriated $5 million toward this effort to understand all of the complexities of Great Salt Lake. Where do we have missing information? How do we identify those gaps? And then really developing a model to address that. So this is really a planning and integration of all the different pieces study that we're undertaking. In addition to that study, the Division of Water Resources put in an application for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart Basin Study Program, and we were able to get a $3.1 million match with the Bureau. And so now we have $8.1 million to help do this effort. So we've kind of integrated these two kind of planning efforts into what we're calling the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. So one of the things that we had the opportunity to do is for the first year of the plan, it was really to develop the work plan, like what are all the things that we're going to consider. And so we have gone through that process. With the stakeholder group that we called together, we were able to define our challenge statement, which is ensuring a resilient water supply requires extraordinary vision and collaborative effort. Solutions remain socially and technically complex as demands on this limited resource continues to increase. Today's water management decisions shape tomorrow's possibilities. We were also able to set a goal for the plan, for this basin integrated plan, is to ensure a resilient water supply for Great Salt Lake in all water uses, including people and the environment throughout the watershed. We recognize that this is a lofty goal, but we really feel like it is something that we should strive and work to achieve for all of Utahns and Great Salt Lake. So as we kind of broke this down, some of the main things that we asked are, what questions do we have and what questions do we need answers to? Some questions we maybe already have the answers to. And so these are the top ones that rose to the level of being incorporated into the plan is how can we build a resilient water supply for Great Salt Lake and its basin? How much water is available in the watershed kind of gets to the supply side. The demand side is how much water do our communities and environment need and why? So if you think of like how much water does our city need for our residential uses or for our commercial uses, or maybe how much does a farmer need? So trying to understand all of the different needs, including for the environment and what are they kind of used for. Understand the water quality challenges and integrating that with what that reliable supply is, understanding how the watershed could impact it, right? Because about 90% of our water supply comes from our snowpack. So as it lands up in our upper watersheds and comes down, part of our questions is how does that interaction with the watershed impact it? So could forest management or watershed restoration provide water and improve water quality? So those are some of those questions. Stormwater, how does stormwater relate to it? And then how much does Great Salt Lake and the wetlands need to support its beneficial uses? So those are kind of the big overarching questions. And through this work plan development, we had a pretty comprehensive stakeholder engagement. We did a situation assessment where we interviewed dozens of people within the watershed trying to understand their perspectives. We had focus group workshops. We did outreach presentations. And then we had two different kind of advisory/steering committees. The advisory group was made up of state and federal partners that work on Great Salt Lake, and the steering committee is made up of kind of external stakeholders that work or have an interest in Great Salt Lake, and we brought them all to the table to help guide this approach. And then in conjunction with that, we had the technical kind of formulation of the work plan where we, put in all the questions that we wanted to understand. We did an extensive literature review and gap analysis of all the things that we know and where are there gaps in our knowledge. We had the advisory and the steering committee both review and prioritize the gap analysis to help guide us in where we're really going to take this Great Salt Lake Basin integrated plan. And I kind of landed it into these kind of three buckets of a data and model framework, a collaborative approach of really how are we going to engage stakeholders, and then the scenario planning piece as well. So we have about 3 years to do the rest of the work. So we have an ambitious target and a lot of work to get done. Mainly this year and next we'll be developing or quantifying all the water resources and developing the models and the tools that we need. 2025, we're really focused on evaluating all of our options as well as scenario development and how strategies and tactics to address some of the information that we're finding. And then by 2026, getting to that recommended action stage. And all along the way, we're talking about implementing no regret solutions, forging connections within the watershed, and developing a shared understanding. And so the kind of like final comment that I wanted to make is, whether, you live upstream of the Great Salt Lake or you live right next door to its shores, we're all part of the same water cycle, right? It impacts all of us. And I think it's really important that when we make these management decisions that we're kind of thinking about the broader impacts across the watershed. And I would say it's really important that we take this opportunity with this Great Salt Lake Basin integrated plan to really be able to understand what we know, what we don't, and understand the trade-offs as we make decisions and the impacts of, our changing climate. So I think it's something that's really exciting, and there's a lot of work to be done, but I hope your viewers, stay engaged in the process throughout it.
Thank you, Candice. That was a lot of really good, lots of information. So it's like almost like go back and push pause on the slides in between.
Oh,
A lot of data. No, it was good. This was good. Like we don't mind giving lots of information. We're at the library. We love information. And so, yeah, I'm just still trying to absorb it, but in a good way. So thank you so much.
yeah.
Let's see, I'm pulling up our questions because we had a lot of questions specifically about Great Salt Lake that were very interested, invested, very passionate, and engaged, and we love that. One of the first questions we got looks like was partially answered just in the presentation about what was being done to conserve water and then what data there was on it, and you gave us lots of data. And so I'll summarize. The last question is maybe a thought on other people's minds. Will the Salt Lake Valley really be a wasteland in 50 years?
That's great. And I would add, we really, in this presentation, I really focused on the Great Salt Lake Basin integrated model. I would say there has been a tremendous amount of effort that has been undertaken by the legislature through appropriations and new programs and new tools that can help Great Salt Lake. Just for example, the legislature put in about $1 billion of appropriations into all different types of water conservation, agricultural optimization, landscaping incentives. They also developed a Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, which is looking at doing either short-term leases or purchases of water rights to dedicate water to Great Salt Lake. They passed water banking statutes, which allow for an easier place for water rights to be exchanged through more of an open market. They authorized split season leases and a bunch of other things. So there was a lot of efforts to do a lot of things and provide us with the tools. And I would say that even we're in the middle of the legislative session right now, and which will probably maybe be over by the time this airs, but there's still a lot of things going on regarding Great Salt Lake in this session too. So it'll be interesting to see what finishes up after this session. As far as, will Salt Lake Valley really be a wasteland in 50 years? In my opinion, I think the short answer is no. If we continue down the path that we're going as far as trying to do all the things that we can to help Great Salt Lake. There was the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office that was formed last legislative session. So we have Brian Steed is our Great Salt Lake Commissioner, and his deputy, Tim Davis, are working diligently to put together a strategic plan and really to move the needle to get more water to Great Salt Lake. I think if the answer is, we're just going to sit back and let the Great Salt Lake do whatever it does, I think that would be more concerning. But with the level of effort and the work that we're doing, I'm very hopeful that we'll have a bright future.
There are a lot of people very invested in Great Salt Lake, and it seems that the more people get on board, the more things are turning hopefully in a positive direction for it. So that is very encouraging. It seems like the plan, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, it feels almost slow, but it feels like the puzzle pieces are an important part. So it's like it may not seem like the needle's turning very much, or like where would you say it is when it's like, oh yeah, wait and see for 2 years when it seems dire during drought and stuff. But would you say that that's an important part of the phase in being able to gather the correct data?
That's a great question, and I feel like not everyone I've talked to, but the majority of people I've talked to, they said, we should have done this 10 years ago. right? And it's that whole old adage is, we should have, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the next best time is today. And so we are tackling this project today. And whilst I know it feels slow to some people, I think this is really going to help provide the tools, the modeling capabilities, to really address kind of the challenges that we're facing in the future, as well as be able to do a trade-offs analysis, right? If water goes here instead of here, what is the risk? What is the consequence? And having tools available to help answer that is really important. So I think it's something that's overdue, but we are working diligently to get it done within the time frame that the legislature and the Bureau of Reclamation have set for us.
Yes. And I guess in tying in with that, we did have a question about, does the GSL-BIP, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan, lack specifics for a reason, why we don't have specific direction? Could you explain the process for having it being open-ended at the moment?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is really the work plan, right? This is kind of laying out our marching orders for the next few years and developing the model and how we're going to interact with all the different water users and interests within the Great Salt Lake over the next several years. And it kind of lays out the specific research questions that we have and we feel like we still need more answers to. So those will all be things. I should note that we did have a public comment period of this where it was open for 45 days. It closed the beginning, mid-January timeframe, and now we are working on the final work plan. That being said, we are pushing forward with all the things that we need to do, including building a model, getting contracts in place to do all of that. So like I said, this is really, in my mind, the complementary technical arm of the Great Salt Lake strategic plan that the commissioner's office has put out. So that one has very specifics like what are we going to do under different timeframes, and this is more of like the modeling and research tool, if that helps to clarify.
Yes, you are the puzzle. So finding out where the pieces are missing and what can be done with it. It's a good analogy. We actually had several questions of variances, varying ways of asking it, but basically asking, is the Great Salt Lake healthy in your opinion? Is it able to sustain potential growth in our region? Have we outstripped our potential? Are we overusing the water based off of that? How is Great Salt Lake doing as we love it as an entity?
Yeah, so right now, we're in a lot better place than we were at the end of 2022. I would say we're not out of the woods yet. For example, our current elevation in the south arm is 4193.8, or sorry, 4193.2. We found with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands Comprehensive Management Plan and with the Great Salt Lake Strike Team that we find the optimal range between 4198 and 4205. So obviously we're below that, right? That being said, as far as the salinity levels are concerned, we are in a healthy range as far as salinity. It was mid-February, about 129 grams per liter, which is within that healthy range. So we are not out of the woods yet. We're still low and not at that optimal range of 4198. In the commissioner's strategic plan, they did set that as their kind of target to get to that point and trying to get water to the lake to at least get to that minimum point of that optimal range, but we're not quite there yet, but better than we were. So we're going in the right direction if we can keep conserving and reducing how much water we use, and then as well as Mother Nature keeps helping out too by providing us with average to big years.
Yes, exactly. And that's actually a perfect segue into one of what you would recommend that people listening can do. because part of Let's Be Neighbors is a really big push to be informed and engaged, and things that they can do to actionable steps that they can do to make a difference. Is there anything either with the integrated plan or just conserving water in general, ways to specifically help the Great Salt Lake that come to mind, even just 1 to 2 that you can think of that people can do to help out?
For sure. I mean, I've heard a lot in my position of I'll conserve when. I'll conserve when the church down the road does, or when the farmer across town does, or when my neighbor does. And I think that's one thing that we all need to do is all be conservation minded and determine how and when we can best conserve within our own kind of houses. If you have a yard, one great place to look at is our landscaping. Typically uses between around 60% of our residential water supplies is used on our landscapes. And so and we're not saying lawn is bad. It's just if the only time you're walking on it is when you mow it once a week, it could probably be something else. So really looking at that non-functional turf that we can replace and put in water-wise landscaping can save a lot of water. And then we're kind of all, working on that. There's also a lot of efforts with agricultural optimization to improve how farmers are using water, and to work with them, and then working with water users and districts to help them supply water as well. So in my opinion, it's got to be something that we all are working toward. I have heard some concerns of, for example, $250 million was put towards secondary metering grants. So for those of you who may or may not know, secondary systems are just what that sounds, a secondary system that provides untreated water for lawns and gardens in some parts of the state. You'll see a lot in Davis and Weber County and those type of things in northern Utah. If you're right in Salt Lake County, you might not know what that is. But because of this historically being untreated, or this is untreated water that previously we didn't have a meter that could read it. And so we found that by providing with technology, we were able to have a meter that's been developed that can read this kind of quote unquote dirty water. And by putting and installing that into these systems, we reduce our water in those areas between 20 and 30%. And this is a great thing. So the legislature required all secondary systems to be metered by 2030 and provided a whole bunch of money, $250 million for it. That being said, that wasn't necessarily, that quote unquote saved water wasn't necessarily saved for Great Salt Lake. And so I think what it does do though, is it creates more system water. Our reservoirs are fuller, our groundwater is more full, and so then we're able to, when we do get a big year, get more runoff to come in. So I think that's one thing that we all need to consider is that, yes, our actions do matter.
So do you have any final wrap-up thoughts before we end our conversation for today?
I am really hopeful about Great Salt Lake. I will say that this is a challenge that many other parts of the world and other parts of the United States have struggled, and I'll say have not succeeded in solving. But I think if there's anywhere that can solve it, it's in Utah and with Utahns, because we are the people who can come together and work toward a solution that's going to help. That being said, there's no silver bullet. There's no if we do this one thing, if we do ag optimization or we do this other one thing, that's not going to solve it. This is a bigger issue. So we need to tackle it from all the different ways to help get water to Great Salt Lake, create more water in our system, so we can continue to have, a healthy and happy Utah that we all love and we all want to be a part of.
Thank you so much, Candice, and for your knowledge, for your time, and for your help in bringing about solutions for all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for everyone that's listening in. It's been great having you. Feel free to keep answering questions for our future seasons. We care about what you guys want to know about, and we want to bring you the experts to do that. So thank you again, Candice. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you guys have a fantastic day.